Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of RPG Jam Sessions. I'm your Uncle Jeff, and I am joined by my good friend, Mr. Brian, who is, and you're hot off the trail, right? You just came back from vacation, and
Yeah.
but I mean, you also had a big awesome conclusion to a game session, so
We did. We
definitely want
did.
to talk about that a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, so this is the show where we sit down and we talk with. I'll talk with any guest that will actually come on the show. Basically, it's pretty close to get. It's
He's
gotten to
not
that.
picky.
It's gotten. No, I'm kidding. No,
If he
la-
started with me,
stop it. You're doing a fantastic job, and you're actually a poster child of what good new GMs do. So you've got to maintain that lofty presence, in my opinion. So last week, a good example is we talked about one-on-one RPGs. I sat down with Brent for a little while for a brief chat. But
hmm
this show, it's really focused on your first foray as a game master into whatever game that may be, and hopefully we'll be able to give you the resources that will help you to be a successful game master. And always being the captain of Segway, that's exactly what we're talking about today, which is resources. We don't have to be too concrete with some of these things, but just some of the basics as a game master, what you should be
yeah,
looking for when you want to start a game. And I think the first thing that pops in my head is the game master screen. As like kind of like a first thing. Man, I don't know. I want to put that aside. I want to hear how the game concluded.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I want to hear how the game
Hear,
concluded.
hear
I
how
want
the
to be
game went.
selfish, kids. I want to be selfish because Uncle
All
Jeff
right.
wants his num nums, and that's going to come in the shape of finding out how this Star Wars
Yeah.
game ended.
Yeah, absolutely. After nuking the ship outside the base with a rigged up speeder core,
That's right. Yep.
they infiltrated. There were quite a few sort of battled their way through the hallways of the base, and sort of made their way through, checking on different rooms. They stumbled on some stormtroopers in a barracks and caught them unaware and took them out quickly with a couple grenades in the room. And
Yeah, grenades will do
uh,
that. No
yeah,
problem.
then they sort of fought their way to the main control room and took out another couple squads of stormtroopers. The droid was taken out and almost inoperable. They had to do some quick salvage work just to barely get them functioning after that one.
Yeah.
It ended with sort of an epic ATST Walker chase through the jungle, fleeing lieutenant, and they were two of them. One plus another droid they had befriended, manning the ATST Walker, and two other ones on speeder bikes.
You don't befriend droids. Come on.
Well, they the droid convinced the droid to help their cause out. So
Gotcha.
um, he was willing to. He was an old battle droid. He was willing to fight for a chance to get off the planet. It ended well. I think they in the sessions, probably the more action had happened in the second to last session, and they set themselves up pretty well. But this one was the final gun battles down the hallway, and
I'm hearing blaster shots in my head. I'm like, I want to play Star Wars.
Yeah,
Sorry.
it was great. So they ended up and ended by taking the base, and they've if they were going to continue the campaign, they would have they've got a great starting a base from which to now explore and continue the rebellion from. So
nice.
Yeah, it was good. And I was sort of mentioned earlier, I actually had a chance to play a full sandbox game. We had talked sandboxing earlier.
Oh my goodness!
I was able to
jam packed, man. See, this is what happens, kids. When he doesn't want to be on this show, he's doing something important. Yeah, all right, he's doing something very game worthy. So I'm gonna let it slide.
Yeah, I called in some favors, and for my birthday, my last two birthdays, I've made people play Star Wars with me. So that's the chance. But I haven't got my dad and my brother-in-law and my nephew to sit down, and we sandboxed an Edge of Empire game, and they were a motley crew of the Shadowed Hand, and they had a few options, and they decided they were going to try and rescue a prisoner from the Hutts.
Nice.
And they were on a floating space station above a junk planet, and
Oh, like you do. Yeah, of course.
they went in and they tried to sweet talk their way in, um, and found out where they're keeping the prisoner, got it busted in, did some slick moves, and got in, and then found out that their contact was double crossing them the whole time. Um, but it was great. It was we did it. I tried to take the sandboxing element to a big cinematic, all-in-one session, start to finish, sort of caper, and using that sandboxing tools. It worked really well. Had some stuff pre-rolled up, but I had my D100s there ready to roll, and they'd start talking, and I'm like, oh, we finally looking for a computer. I'm like, okay. I brought up my little computer table and rolled, and said, yeah, okay, it's gonna be a hard check, and they crack it. Okay, well, this is what you find out, and
so that means you got to use your
I used the full start. We did a start to finish. I rolled up some of the 3 or 4 options for them. They chose it, and I only had a skeleton of an idea going in. Nice. And we sort of made it happen on the fly, and it was really cool because they're my dad and brother-in-law and my nephew, who's like 10. They're not really role players, but they dove right in, and I threw them in, and the meeting the crew, I said, so you just dropped out of hyperspace and you were on what did you just do? What did you just pull off? And they came up with this. They had stolen some kyber crystal enhanced blasters from the Empire, but they didn't have the crystals. And I was like, this is great. That became a thread the whole way through. They were trying to sell them to the Hutts, and it was really so good. Cool. And I was it
sounds like you had some Star Wars fans in the group, right?
Yeah, they're huge Star Wars. My brother-in-law and my nephew are huge fans, and my dad, likes Star Wars too.
Just a little bit. He likes it.
Yeah, he likes it
enough to do this.
Yeah, so we had a great time, and but like we had talked about, I think through running that and having them there on table, really started to hit home the importance of having the right tools available at that time, so that I'm not having to stop and go, well, just a minute, let me see.
Right.
And be flipping, I don't know where that is. And so that was sort of what brought that up to me. I've just been thinking a lot about, what are the tools of the trade, not necessarily all the background prep, because there's a whole host of resources you might need, but when it comes to sit down at the table and you got players in front of you, what do I need to have here so that I have access to everything I need within reason, but quickly, so that it's not it's not cluttered. I don't have 15 sticky notes in a core rule book like that. I'm trying to flip through and find it, and
well, and you said you had your D100s, so you had your 2D10s, you had your chart that you had set up that was part of that PDF conversion you did, and you guys are probably hearing some massive machinery in the background. I apologize, everybody, but the idea of like how much is too much around the table, there's the aspect of, well, when I first did a game mastering, I was working with Shadowrun. That was kind of the one thing that I started with. And if you remember, like the first edition, second edition games, they had stacks of books. You had your core rule book, you had your Shadow Companion, you had your Street Samurai catalog. Second edition, and I think it was the second edition. Am I thinking it right? Second edition Shadowrun Street Samurai catalog is probably one of my favorite RPG books any time. But anyway, I had all of these books, right? And this was when I had this crazy idea of going to Staples, to get some things to help me organize stuff, because I had too many books. And so what I ended up doing is I went and I got a bunch of sticky notes. I ended up getting binders and that sort of stuff to like start organizing things to try and make things a little bit easier to get to. But then I found out that I'm like, those little the post-it notes pads, they come around like about that thick. I realized I went through 2 of them marking areas in the book that I needed to quick reference, and realized I just might as well have the whole book, in front of me.
Yep.
So, so it tell me, was it freeing to have that? You had your sandbox theme. You said you had your D100. You had your information.
Yeah.
What was that like?
It was nice. I mean, what I had on me at the time was I had the GM screen, which, again, I would imagine depends on the system, how helpful they may or may not be. In Star Wars, it's got a lot of great information, but they've got 2 of the 4 sections with critical hits, but they don't have any of the skill checks. And I'm like, oh boy, there's things I wish they would have had, but it's got, but I have, I pulled out a little, piece of paper. I wrote it down. I add that to the side, and so, so I had quick access. And I had the sandbox, but I didn't want to be, that was on the computer. I didn't want to be, I had the computer there if I needed to do it. And occasionally I'd dip in. But what I had done ahead of time was I had a PDF of adversaries, like 1 page, and I knew I could search that PDF. And what I had done was in sketching out the scenario, had selected 4 or 5 sort of NPC profiles that they might come up against, so that when they came up against them, I just went over, typed my code in, because I maybe said journeyman bounty hunter, but whoever they were, I wasn't calling them that, right? So I knew I could get it quick, so I had the stats there for if there was an opposed check or something like that.
So is it like a categorization? So like you'd have a group of bounty hunters, you'd have a group of, mercenaries.
Yeah, like I knew they were going to come up against a Hutt, so I had the stats for a Hutt crime lord, and I knew their main contact, who was going to turn out to be the nemesis. Right. I had his stats sort of fleshed out. Sort of, and in the Star Wars world, there's sort of 3 categories. There's the nemesis, rival, and minion. And I wanted to have the rivals and the nemesis sort of stats a little bit more, so I wasn't having to think on the fly. I was like, I'm just going to use this, put it in, and just be able to grab that quick. And and then Jeff, I had already showed you about these. The example being, I liked it so much. One of the few things I decided to go out and buy was the deck of adversaries, so that I could, if I want them to come up against the the Black Marketeer, quick stats right there, with a few extra things. And what I'm hoping, and what I know I'm going to be able to do with, instead of physical resources, instead of the computer, is when I'm prepping a scenario, go through and pick out the 4 or 5 that I need to have on hand. They're right there. So when they run up against that character, they get into a firefight, or they're trying to negotiate, I don't even, I'm not even looking. I've got them. I just pick that up and I say, yeah, that's going to be this kind of difficulty. And I think in terms of what you need those core tables of difficulties and resolutions on a GM screen, and some quick access to NPC stats. I could handwrite them out every time. I decided to spend some birthday money and get a few. And for me, I liked these because what they actually did was, and this is what Fantasy Flight's done, is they've released these sets. It was $7 for 20 cards. So I bought 4 or 5 of them, but it pulled from 3 or 4 different rule books and multiple source books. So instead of having to go buy, one for the same price that another core rule book would have cost, I essentially got access to sort of pre-generated NPCs from 4 or 5 or 6 books. So that, to me, that was money well spent. And what it means is now, the point I guess I'm going for is I can have key information with less things in front of me. I don't have to be flipping between the book. They might be in the book, but I don't want to have to keep going, well, you're interacting with these 3 NPCs and flip. Oh wait, flip in the middle of a firefight. I want to be able to have those. So as a new GM, I think it's really important to have those critical tables, quickly accessible,
Right.
to have, you know, your NPCs. If you can have, you know, if you can have those random tables ready, and you know how to where to access them. And purposely, I wasn't going to go to every random table. I said, I know I'm going to go to 3 or 4. I'm going to go to computers, and I'm going to go to I don't remember. There was 2 or 3 that I said, if they get into this situation, I know I can just go to this 1 or 2 tables to roll up on that, and be good to go. And
well, you know, the other thing too, I like is the possibility, especially with stuff like that, those cards. Is in my head, I break down my games by scene, so I know that there's. And that does feel very constraining sometimes, because if the characters don't go to that scene, it's like, what do I do? Well, that's okay. I'll just shift these guys over here and make them something different. No big deal. But the interesting thing that I find being able to do that is, if, let's say, you know, you're going to a hut crime lord, you know that you're going to need, you know, maybe a bounty hunter or 2. You know, going to need a thug. You're going to need, you know, maybe a protocol droid, a Gamorrean guard. Of course, you got to have your throwaway guards. So being able to have them kind of, and I'm imagining my game master screen here, but, you know, being able to have like the stack here and then have like a note cards, you know, flip kind of tinted on the top that says, you know, Hut Palace, and then this one over here is the Imperial Garrison, things that they'll run into there. I think that's really helpful. I find when I'm doing a digital game, the things that I save on my computer, I do it by scene. But the thing is that also kind of creates the ability to organize by theme. You know, like what we were saying before, that, you know, things are super dangerous. These are high level threats. And this is if they get mouthy. Well, okay. Yeah. I know what kind of things I need to work with there. If this is going to be more of a social thing, then yeah, I'll be able to bring in some stats for that. But knowing the kind of players that are around your table, knowing the kind of situation that you may or may not get into, is going to help you kind of organize stuff and pull the right data that you need. That game master, whether it's on your computer, or the game screen, whether it's on your computer or if it's an actual physical screen that you have before you, the cool thing there is being able to decide, you know, what goes on there. Some games like Pathfinder, D&D, several other games, Savage Worlds, will have the specifics of the types of roles that you need, and, you know, Star Wars is no different. Especially, like, you know, what are the critical roles? What do the dice mean? With Star Wars, that was something that I needed to have in front of me. I ended up, when we played our Star Wars game as a player, I had the definitions. I had our definitions of the game, of the dice, like right out there in front of me. So yeah, you kind of have to know a little bit about the territory you're going into, and if you don't, having those random tables like you're talking about is going to be a big bonus. So you've had an opportunity to kind of, you know, run a game that was a sandbox, like you said. You had like a live sandbox game, but then you also had the opportunity to, you know, run through this Star Wars adventure, which was based in, you know, it was based in a book, and obviously you have things that are happening outside of the book because players are going to be players. But what did you find better or worse between the two when it comes to resources? Did you feel panicky when you were doing the books, like you had to have all the books there ready to go? You know, what did you learn from that?
Yeah, I think my personal style is more comfortable on a very open, off the cuff sort of game. And so I actually found having the scenarios in the book was quite cumbersome in many ways. You know, trying to go, oh, okay, well, because then it just added one more layer of things that I had to be looking at while I was interacting with my players. And I personally, I think you know, in that sandbox, luckily most of it I was able to pre-generate, use it to seed the whole adventure and taking less prep time. But there wasn't as much need for that, oh no, I got to make something up right now. I had a lot of stuff sort of pre-generated. And so in that sense, I was able, for resources, I had my GM screen. I had them there. I knew where they were, but it was mostly just my book in front of me, in case something came up, or, the ship, they wanted, they were, I knew we were going to be on a spaceport. So I kind of just had the ship section open, and just based on where they were going, like, I decided, yeah, the prisoner's going to be hidden away on a quiet section, so it's easier for him to get into. And I'm like, yeah, he's on, and I was looking down, I was like, he's on a luxury yacht, the such and such yacht, and it was just in my book, so, but I didn't have much there. The point being, I think a potential danger for a new GM is to be so caught up in the rules or the stats or what would be considered the right thing, that you are interacting more with your resources than you are with your players. And the less that you can have in front of you to distract you, then the more you can just engage with your players and riff off of what they're doing, and give them agency. And one of the things I found, at least in my sandbox, a little bit of a, almost like a nod to Dungeon World, is, more of the asking my players, what do you see? Instead of me going, okay, we're on a space station, what's the right thing? What do you see around you? What is this? What does it look like? I might say, oh, you're on a dank space station, or you're in a dungeon. Okay, but what do you see? Describe what you see around you and give them agency, within reason. Because the nice thing was they came up with super cool stuff, and while they're talking and describing cool stuff, I go, oh, that's really good. And then I get a chance to look up a few things and go, oh, okay, cool. And then I'm back and I jump on that, and then I, but I'm not going, okay, you roll that. Okay, flip. Like where the less my head is down, the better it is. And that's why I think thinking about what those core resources are, and that's why, a GM screen is, I think, an important thing. And GM screen doesn't have to be, it's not decorative. And it's not, it shouldn't be. If that's your only purpose, forget it.
This is where I roll my dice and nobody else can see that. And it can be ugly. I think a great idea is the whole, you take 2-3 ring binders, open them up, and you clip them together so you get a triple thing, and just put some paper in there that you've got in there, so you've got quick access to your tables. And homemade GM screen, man. That's perfect.
Or homemade GM. It doesn't even need to be a screen. Like,
that's perfect. Binders, boom.
There's some great resources out there for homemade GM screens. I would go so far as to say, if I didn't want to spend the money on a GM screen, I'd get my phone out, my camera, I'd go through the book, and I would literally take a picture of the tables that I need, and go put them on, maybe put 1 or 2 on a page, and print out 4 or 5 pages so that I can just lay those out, so that right in front of me, I've got all the key tables. So all I have to do is look this way, and then put your, you could put your
binders,
your rule book, your binders, and put your rule book up if you want.
He never looks at his rule book. It's just a screen. What's he doing?
And doing, trying to pare it down as much as you can, I think is really what I'm going for. Think about them. And I guess the one we haven't talked about is, part of mine is born out of necessity. Don't have a ton of disposable income for games at the moment, and don't want to just blow $300 on source books. But even if you do, I think that's just as much of a danger, thinking that, if I buy all these source books, that now I'm a better GM because I have more access. I don't think that's true. I think you've got to, until you've got that core rule book where you're like, I already know everything in here and it's boring me, that's when you get the new book. You know, it's
Right.
like
You're trying to
it's like,
reinvigorate the game
yeah,
for yourself
you're
almost.
adding something in,
Yeah.
or you know, some of those sources and things, or you know, they can be nice for character creation, but you know, you should like core rule book, GM screen, and a couple extra pieces of paper is all I want in front of me.
Right.
You know, keeping it simple at the table is important. Now, if
And that's
you can buy all those other good ones for your shelf, that's
yeah,
be
it
my
looks
guess.
great. It looks great when it's on
Yeah,
the shelf. You know,
yeah,
fantastic. But the hey, you know what? And when I like I said with my experience with Shadowrun, that kind of led my way through sessions of games after that. You know, when I got into D&D right about the time when 3.0 came out. You know, I'd started with AD&D and with the second edition, my buddy had all those books. But then when I got into 3.0, I was like, oh, you know what? I'm gonna take up where I left off with Shadowrun. I'm gonna start game mastering. So I thought, well, I gotta get all of these books, right? And that's when I got my first job, and I quote unquote had disposable income, and I just poured all of it into that, right? And then 3.5 came out, and I'm like, oh, thanks a lot, appreciate that. But I found myself as a game master, even though I knew certain aspects of those pages. I knew, like, you know, this particular monster was probably in this book around 2/3 of the way through, and I'll find it. But the thing is that I spent so much time doing that. It's not just that you're doing that. It's the fact that you're taking yourself out of the game. You're taking the players out of the game in some instances, because two things will happen. One, you're busy doing that, you're looking at it, and then another one is that they're busy with their nose buried in the book, you know, versus you know, playing the game. But there are going to be instances and situations where you're going to need to do that. You know, there's going to be times when you're trying to figure out, okay, first time I played 5e, we're trying to figure out what's a short rest and a long rest. What does that mean, really? You know, let's talk about that. And so, you know, we found ourselves, okay, well, let's take a break. Let's go take a look at the rules, sit down, chat for a little bit, and then get back into the game. So, like, when it comes to a point where you're wanting to do a little bit of book work, you know, no pun intended, might be the time where you just kind of take a quick break, step away, look at it and find your materials, and maybe even add to some of the things that you have in your GM screen, or that players have on their character sheets. The other thing, as far as resources goes, and as a new GM, it's something that you can pass along to your players, is for them to know the sections of the rule book that's pertinent to them. Again, I'll use Shadowrun. The example of magic users in that game, there's a lot of nuances, especially in first edition, and they're all over the book. You know, you have one rule for this, and then you have to go and you think, okay, well, how does that spell commit to drain? So I have to go and check out drain, and then wait, is that like go against your what? No, I got to go check over here. So if you can have an agreement with your players, especially for your long-term games, and they know this is a character they want to play for a long time, have them really learn the rules for their character, and then that way you can depend on them to be the specialist in that area. You don't have, as one less thing as a game master you have to worry about. So I would highly recommend that. It's been very successful in some of the games that I've run.
And I think, you know, in the parallel, that's I'm thinking ahead to wanting to run some sandbox games.
Yeah, you are.
For some people, perhaps, you know, in the tavern, or some of the regulars and things like that, and or Jeff.
That's what I want.
But you know, I'm thinking ahead, going, okay, I have to be. Don't be afraid as a GM to limit the scope of what you allow them to choose in that as well. I'm going
picking the books, picking the specific books from that game.
Exactly. And saying, because I'm going, boy, if I'm going to do this, I'm like, I know I want to run it in this version of those, you know, there's the different flavors of the game. I'm going to run it here. And I, you know, going so far as to say, you've got to run what's in this core rule book unless you own the book yourself. Because the other one, the danger you get into is people are like, oh, I'll just use the online character creator, and those things have like every option
stacks
from
of books
stacks of books. And they're like, well, I chose this thing, and I'm like, well,
looking at you, Hero Lab, looking right at you. Fantastic
like,
interface, fantastic thing, but oh boy, man,
you know, it gets him in trouble. And I'm like, you know, have to bring it, you have to rein it in it goes with that idea of keeping it manageable at the table. because you'll kill your game if you'll either, you know, and it's not that people are trying to be malicious. It's just
no. 9 times out of 10, that's not the case.
They're like,
it's just,
this sounds cool.
I've got this cool thing, and like, you know, Unearthed Arcana just came out and fixed the Ranger, so I definitely want to use that. And I kind of like that. Well, yeah, okay. If you know the rule and you bring it to the table and we discuss it, let's do it.
If we agree on it,
you
know, and so binding it in so that you have the ability, because there's no way you can memorize the core rule book. You know, you're not going to memorize every stat.
Not with this brain.
You gotta know it. You gotta know where to find it. You know, make sure it's in the index. And shocking, some of the things that aren't in indexes sometimes. But you know, so that you can, you know, while they're doing something, you're like, you're looking something up, and you know, but you don't want to get bogged down in that. Keep it narrow. Keep your players. Keep them playing in a game that you can referee in a fun and fair way,
and comfortably.
Like you've got to be, I think, comfortable in your own skin. Doing that, and
you can spend your time getting out of your comfort zone in the narrative, in the story, letting the players do something completely crazy, like stacking a bunch of motorcycle or swoop bike generators together and creating a nuke. You know, that's crazy. I never would have thought of that. But if you're spending your time buried in the rules, buried in like what was on page 3 of the campaign, the ultimate campaign from Pathfinder, what was that? You know, having to spend your time doing that, it's just taking you out of the game, and that gets you out of that comfort zone, I think, in a bad way. Much to your point, is that know the rules that you want to work with. I've set up games once in a while with one shots and trilogies that I'm hoping to run here soon this year. I like that idea of establishing what books are going to be kind of canon for this particular game. So like, that's a good way to say it. If I do D&D, then am I going to use just the player's handbook and the monster manual, or am I going to use the player's handbook and the Sword Coast Adventures? Volvo, I call it Volvo's Guide, but it's Volo's Guide.
Voldemort's Guide.
Voldemort's Guide to Volvos and other Swedish car makers. Am I going to have those particular games in mind? There's the tendency to, you know, open up the entire world, especially like you said, you have them all on the shelf, and you're like, I can't wait to show them the page where they have the undead beholder, and it's like, well, when are they going to run into an undead beholder? Right now. But so manage yourself as a game master to the point where you feel comfortable. You run with the rules that you feel good with, and if you don't know them, ask your players for help sometimes. You know, maybe they can look up a rule, you know, that maybe you don't have it at hand and you want to keep the game going, but you have a resource that you can hand to them and say, hey, look up this rule while I handle what the rogue's doing over here. You know, bring the things that are crucial to the table, like your tables. Table on a table. Put it in on your game master screen or on your laptop or on sticky notes and stuff, where you say, okay, well, I know what this dice means in Star Wars, and I know what a critical means, and I know what a failure means. I know what despair means, that sort of thing. Having those handy is going to make the game run a lot smoother, and you spend more time with the story. You spend more time finding out what your players want to do, which is really cool. And then don't hesitate to take a break. If it comes down to a very crucial rule, like what do you get with a short rest? Take a break. Find out. Let's see. Take a short rest and find out exactly what the heck's going on. And I'll add this one thing, and maybe just kind of as a tail end to this broadcast, is don't be afraid to make a mistake. Don't be afraid to make. You're going to. It's just going to happen. Whether it's this year or 10 games down the road, it's going to happen. You'll make a rules mistake. You know, be willing to, you know, work that, either work it into the narrative or go back on it. I fear the retcon, just simply because it can take away from a story. We had a brief example is with our Of Minds and Biscuits game. I had not paid attention to how many hit points the cleric had and realized, wait a minute, they were adding all their constitution number, their score, not their modifier, to their hit points. And I was like, man, I should have taken her down a long time ago, but man, she just keeps soaking up the damage. And then realized it, you know, okay, I hadn't paid attention. I hadn't policed the character sheets like I should have, or I even said that I was going to review them and I had missed it. So the next story, the next episode, I just explained it as being there was a special touch by that particular god that she serves that gave her sustainability through that fight. And there's a reason that's going to appear later on down the road. So, you know, don't be afraid to make the mistakes. It's going to happen, and then work with your table on how to fix it.
Yeah,
you know?
It's, you know, I had a few of those where, you know, I forgot to take soak for the stormtroopers, so they were dropping like flies. And I'm like, man, they are just not
these guys are good, man.
And then
wow.
I say it, and then I go, you know, or so there was something that's happening, and I said, well, like, oh man, we were doing that wrong. Whoops.
That armor really did suck.
Are we okay? Are we okay with it being this going forward instead of what it was? And everybody's like, yeah, oh yeah, that makes sense. And, you know, that was, so the narrative didn't have changed. The stormtroopers were down. We didn't need to resurrect the stormtroopers because it was too easy.
They had a bad batch of armor. It just came out of a bad.
You know, all of a sudden, one you thought he was dead and he wasn't. You know, but you know, players are fine with that usually, and you know, if they're not, then you can send them over to a game of 4E and
let them play some miniatures.
Let them play, and it's a certain, you know, at a certain point you go, it's a role-playing game. It's not a miniatures game. Yeah. If you love those rules, there's nothing wrong with that either.
Yeah,
it's just, you know, if that kills the game for them, then you can apologize. But I can't imagine. Yeah, you apologize, you move on, you agree, you say, hey, oops. Yeah. And
chances are it's just not going to happen. You know, you'll work with it. But
oops, let's do this, and everybody has a good laugh, and
yeah. Well, you know, I think that's as good a place as any to kind of round it up.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the main thing here is just, you know the game that you're going into. Learn the rules, the basics, the things that you don't want to have cobbled up inside your brain. Just put them onto your GM screen. Find the layout that works best for you, whether you like pictures. I like rhombus a lot. You know, hieroglyphics, that works fine too. And then just put those together, put them on your Game Master screen, and you can use that. And then as far as how many books you have at the table, go with as many as you are comfortable with and can manage. Don't over prepare that. You know, let the story flow. That's where the focus of the game normally should be. I would say a vast percentage of the time. But
find your sweet spot. Think about it. Too few, too many resources. Both have the same effect.
Exactly. So, well, once again, I'm really happy to have my buddy Brent over here. I'm sorry, Brian. Sorry, I'm looking at the previous screen. Sorry. I'm happy to have both Brent and Brian here. Actually, I wouldn't mind having them both here on this show. But thanks, Brian, for coming back. Finding out how your game wound up, and then also the opportunity to do a sandbox. We'll definitely look forward to finding out more what you're going to do with InnRoads with that particular skill set very soon. But until then, thanks a lot, kids, for joining us. We are always happy to provide information for our new GMs out there. If you have questions, that sort of thing, hit me up on Twitter at GSPKHEEGAN. And right below here in the show notes, we'll put together some information, maybe a couple of links here and there that might help you with your game. So check those out. And if you want to know a little bit more about InnRoads Ministries, check us out at InnRoadsMinistries.com. Until then, thanks a lot for your time and your viewing. We hope to see you again real soon on the next episode of RPG Jam Sessions. Till then, have a fantastic time. Play some games, make some friends.
Absolutely.